Yeah, it's a complicated topic, but I think my point in writing that article was a lot of the conversation around AI has been presented in a way as if nobody had ever thought of these questions before, when in fact in aviation for probably 20 years now, we've been having this debate, whether it's GPS or autopilots and automation, auto throttle, we keep going. Even in GA now, we have things like Garmin's auto land system. We've been having a conversation about computers and humans in the flow, in the loop for many, many years. And some of those principles, I think, apply very well. So, is a single pilot airliner technically possible? Sure. I mean, absolutely. You guys could tell me more than I could. But technically possible doesn't answer the question. There's a whole conversation around reliability and backup. There's a whole conversation around social acceptance and the passengers on board. It's just, I think sometimes these conversations get simplified into, well, couldn't we technically fly an airplane with one pilot or even no pilots? Sure, and we do, and the military does it every day. But that doesn't mean that's necessarily the right answer. And one of the things that I think is really underappreciated by most people around the world is just how incredibly safe airline flying is. It's absolutely one of the miracles of the modern world that you essentially have a 0% chance of dying on a major commercial airline. Every year there are a handful of crashes, but a handful out of hundreds of millions, billions of passenger flights taken every year. It's just incredibly safe. And I think we take that for granted a lot. And so what that means is the burden on a fully automated system is quite high. It's not good enough to say, well, it's 98% good, and that would work. Well, we don't run on 98% in aviation. We run on 99.99999% good. And I think that's where a lot of the conversation is going to have to come in. I play with ChatGPT. It's great. It's exciting. If it gets the facts wrong about an article I'm researching, I'll go double check it. If it creates an image for me that has a person with 6 fingers, I'll notice that. We're not there in aviation. We have a higher standard. So I am all in favor of technology. I love technology. I think some of the things we have in the modern cockpit are truly important safety innovations. But we just have to keep in mind the standard. And the standard we deal with in aviation is quite different.
Linha Column 0 Gol 5625.
Sejam muito bem-vindos mais uma semana aqui no Farol de Pouso, mais um episódio internacional. Então eu vou começar falando em português, mas já eu vou trocar para inglês. Começar nosso episódio com o John, eu queria mandar o nosso agradecimento, nosso reconhecimento para os nossos apoiadores aqui do projeto, aqui do podcast, começando pela Hangar 33, a sua marca de moda masculina da aviação. Também temos a Realizar, escola de voo lá no município de Torres, no Rio Grande do Sul, para você que quer tirar suas carteiras e seguir carreira profissional. E, obviamente, para seguir uma carreira profissional, o que você precisa ter? TRM. E para isso temos a FCT, Human Development, com a gente aqui no Farol de Pouso, para te ajudar a desenvolver suas habilidades de CRM. E isso é muito importante não só para você que voa, mas também para você que tem qualquer tipo de trabalho em equipe, como, por exemplo, um escritório, uma equipe de resgate, qualquer equipe multidisciplinar, entre em contato com eles aqui no Instagram, no fct.human. E, obviamente, se você quer entender o restante desse podcast, você vai precisar ter uma boa base de inglês. E para isso temos o FP Aviation, que é o nosso projeto aqui da casa, que vai te ajudar não só com o seu preparatório de inglês para tirar o seu certificado de ICAO, mas com conversação geral, com preparatório para seleção de linha aérea, que as vagas estão bombando aqui no Brasil atualmente. Para você que está pensando em expatriar, entre em contato com a gente aqui no @FP Aviation no Instagram. With all that said, today I'm here with Conrado, our honored guest Anderson, co-host with us, Caio, and of course, John Zimmermann. So John, welcome aboard. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to this.
Well, good evening, good morning, good night, good everything for everybody who is here with us. Conrado speaking. Pleasure to host you, John. Obviously, you were brought by Anderson, who is a frequent flyer here on our podcast. He's co-hosting a few episodes with us, which makes me very happy, by the way, because he's a great guy. I love him. But I'd like to hear from you, because I don't know exactly how did you met and how you guys came into a relationship or somehow. So I'd like to start from there. So how do you know Anderson? How did you get to know him?
It's a great aviation story. Aviation really is a global community, I think. And so this is an example of that. In addition to my day job at Sporty's, working in the retail business and the training business, I'm the editor of an online magazine called Airfax. And that's a website that is primarily reader written. So out of 100 articles, 95 will be written by regular Airfax readers, not professional writers. And it's a great website we've been doing for over a decade, and actually goes back to the 1930s. It was originally a print magazine done by Leighton Collins, the father of Richard Collins, which many longtime pilots will recognize from his writing in Flying Magazine. So we at Sporty's run Airfax as a labor of love. We do it for fun, to share the joy and some lessons learned of flying. And Anderson over the years has written a lot of articles for Airfax. So I don't know how long it goes back, Anderson, but probably 5 years at least. He's written a bunch of great articles about all kinds of things, about his aviation journey, about flying the 787, about training in the U.S. So we've just over the years traded lots of story ideas back and forth, and published stories and comments. And he's been a fantastic contributor to Airfax and really brought some interesting international perspective for us. So we've just kind of been pen pals ever since, talking about airplane stuff.
Well, that's not a surprise for me, I believe. Anderson, how did you get to read the magazine and thinking of writing for the magazine as well?
Yeah, I mean, I was already writing for other outlets in Brazil and Portugal also, and I was trying to find somewhere where I could write in English as well. And when I found Airfax, I just fell in love with it. Like John said, it's a very passionate initiative. Things started like in 1938, if I'm not mistaken. And to think that almost 100 years later, we're still talking about Airfax, although with another format and everything. So John, Pat Lubeck, of course, they were very kind to like what I wrote and published for the first time. And from there we started. John Zimmermann, for many people in Brazil, they don't know his name, but they probably been across something that he wrote or he did, because he's like a smartphone. The smartphones, you can take pictures, you can record film, and you can edit, you can measure stuff with smartphones, and on top of that, you still can talk on them like they were phones, right? And just like that, he's an editor of Airfax, he's President of Sporty, host of Pilot Discretion. We're going to talk about his own podcast here today. And on top of that, he's also a pilot, and not just an airplane pilot, a helicopter pilot as well. So I have a question for you, John. How do you manage to be all that? Because you're not the average John at all.
Well, thank you. It's easy to be busy with things when you like it, right? So the old advice that if you have a job you love, it doesn't feel like work. It's cliche, but it's true. And I think that's true of a lot of people in aviation, that if you love what you do, you just can't get enough of it. And one of the fun things here at Sporty's is we are a collection of aviation enthusiasts. We all fly. We love to fly. We love to talk about flying. When we're not working on flying, we're doing it for fun. So what that means is we end up getting involved in lots of different parts of aviation. So, we run a flight school here at Sporty's. We have the website people know. We do Airfax. And because we're just into aviation in all its ways, I just find myself getting pulled different directions. So let's reboot Airfax as an online magazine. Great. That sounds fun. Let's do a podcast. Great. That sounds fun. And we don't get caught up in the business plan or the bureaucratic review process. We love aviation like you guys. And so when you love it, it's just kind of hard not to do it. And so for me, helicopters, I've been flying airplanes about 25, 30 years. And about 10 years ago, I had always wanted to fly helicopters. And I did a terrible thing, a really stupid thing. I said, I'll go take one lesson and just see what it's like, which you can guess how that goes, right? You take one lesson and you decide, that was the coolest thing I've ever done in my life, and I've got to keep doing that. And so that's how a lot of that stuff works. If you love it, you can't help but get involved in all different parts of it. And that's the way it is with aviation. I mean, I never intended to have a career in aviation. I was flying as a kid and thought I'd do something else. But once you get into aviation, as you know, it's hard to get out. It's hard to get that out of your blood. And you just find yourself getting drawn into all kinds of different parts of the industry.
And how did that happen to you?
I learned to fly in high school. So like I said, when some people were probably studying harder or, playing more sports, I was a pretty average basketball player, but I really liked airplanes. And so I soloed at 16 and got my private license at 17 and just hung around the airport a lot and loved every bit of that. But I always figured I'd go get a real job, quote unquote. And that didn't last. I graduated from college and came to work at Sporty's, and I figured I'd do that for a couple of years and then go out to the real world. And what I realized is A, aviation is the real world, and B, it's a whole lot more fun than a lot of other jobs. And so for me, I'm not a professional pilot. I'm not logging 100 hours a month or anything, but I get to go to work on the airport every day here at Sporty's. I get to fly helicopters and tail draggers and turboprops and everything in between. And to me, that's the variety that I love about it. That's one of my favorite parts about aviation. When I first got into aviation as a kid, like most people, I assumed, well, aviation means airlines. So aviation means 737s. And what I realized quickly is aviation is this huge industry. There's engineering, there's maintenance, there's air traffic control, there's flying. Even within flying, there's airline pilots, there's cargo pilots, there's flight instructors. There's just so many different parts of the business. And that to me is what's fun about it, is it's never the same job. And I think anybody who's in aviation knows that it's never the same job. Sure, there are times when, how many times can I fly to New York and fly the same arrival? Okay, that can get a little boring, but in general, it's something different. The weather's different, the passengers are different, the mission's different, the airplane's different. And I just love all the variety of aviation. So that's what keeps me coming back.
That sounds like a lovely life. You mentioned Sporty's quite a few times already, and I'd like you to explain a little bit better for our audience who doesn't know exactly what Sporty's is. Can you just describe what you do? What does the company do?
Yeah, Sporty's is the largest pilot shop in the U.S. and some places outside the U.S. We ship all over. So we're the place to buy a flight bag or a Bose headset or a Garmin smartwatch or something like that. But also, we do a lot of online training. So we have a complete private pilot course, an instrument rating course, and that's a big part of our business is delivering training online. So that basically, with our course, that plus a flight instructor, you can get your certificates and ratings, and that's really core to who we are. We were founded in 1961 by a flight instructor. And so we've been in flight instruction really since we've ever existed. And so in addition to the pilot supplies part, all the gear you need, we're really proud to be deeply involved in the education part of it too.
I did my private and my instrument, my commercial using Sporty's prepwares.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, this is back 11 years ago.
It's come a long way since then, I bet. We may have still had DVDs back then. It's now, all online or iPad apps or Android apps. So it's a really fun part of the business. Talk about something that's different every day. New people coming into the industry every day, new people chasing aviation careers every day. We love working with those people. We love helping people achieve their goals. As you know, it's such a good time to get into aviation now. And we love helping people achieve those goals.
And funny enough, you mentioned DVDs back in the day. Some of the newer people that listen to the podcast will think that DVDs is a technology that the old Egyptians used back in the day, not something that they are quite used to have nowadays.
Yeah, we go back through the history of Sporty's training, and the very first technology was slideshow. So the old, Kodak slide projector, that was really high tech. And then we did VHS tapes and then DVDs and then online, and now smartphone apps and smart TV apps and Apple CarPlay and whatever else we can dream up. So we're playing around with the Apple Vision Pro this week, trying to figure out how to deliver 360 video on that. So there's always a new technology we need to use to make aviation training easier and more interesting.
I had some of the DVDs back in the days, and I have bought a lot of stuff from Sporty's along the years, especially when back on the days when we didn't have much information, and Sporty was big brand already. When the internet started, many years ago. So I remember I bought some stuff from the shop, and it was quite impressive because there was nothing, absolutely nothing, but Sporties. Was already the biggest one, and it was very helpful for me as a new student or enthusiastic future aviator, buying stuff from a big shop using the internet that we had to connect after midnight because it was too expensive to to do online before that. So it was back on the days. John, you said you fly a lot of stuff, right? And there is one particular airplane that we were discussing during the warm-up here, the PC-12, the Pilatus. I'm passionate about this aircraft. My dream is to fly a Pilatus, at least log 1 hour, or just fly for a couple of minutes. I don't know why I have this dream. It's an impressive machine, but I'd like to hear from you as a pilot on the Pilatus. How do you like the aircraft, and tell us a little bit more about how this amazing bird flies.
It's the best airplane I've ever flown. There's lots of good airplanes out there, lots of them, but it's the best airplane I've ever flown because it can do so much. The versatility is really what makes it special. It's like an SUV. We say it's like a Suburban or a Tahoe, big, brawny American SUV that you stuck wings on in a Pratt & Whitney engine. So as an example, it can go long range. So I have done 1,500 nautical mile trips, which is 5 hours and 45 minutes in a single engine turboprop. It's a long way. That's almost coast to coast in the U.S. So it's got very long range, but it's also a great short field performer. So we have taken it in and out of 2,000 foot long strips. You can take it in and out of grass runways. It's got big, beefy landing gear, trailing link gear, and big tires. So it's a decent off-road machine too. And it'll also haul a lot. So it's got 6 seats in the back. You can put as many as 9 back there. And it's got a big cargo door on the left side. So you can do all kinds of halfway configurations. You can have 4 passenger seats and then flat floor in the back, and you can haul. You'll see pictures online of hauling motorcycles or skids of product around. We've done it all in that airplane, and it's that perfect mix. So you can take 5 passengers and a whole lot of stuff, and you can take it out of a 2,500 foot strip, and you can fly 1,000 miles at 260 knots. It's just a fantastic combination. Most of the time in aviation, it's about trade-offs, right? You can have long range, but you're not going to be able to carry much. Or you can have great short field performance, but it doesn't go very fast or go very high. And it's just a great combination of all those things. It'll haul a lot, or it can go a long way. It can go reasonably fast. And it's also, I think, really easy to fly. For a big 10,000-pound turboprop, I mean, sure, it's harder to fly than a Cessna 172. But compared to a light jet, a Citation jet or a Embraer Phenom 300, it's much easier to fly than that. You can, it's got a single power lever. There's not even a propeller control. So it's just single power lever, go fast, go slow. And the approach speeds, because it's got the big wing with the big flaps, you can have approach speeds of 72 knots. That is Cessna 182 speed. So, certainly it's an airplane. You can get yourself in trouble like you can with any airplane. But I just think for all the performance and versatility, it's actually a really easy airplane to fly. It's a lot of fun to fly. You can take it out on trips and have fun working with it. So I love it. I could talk all day about that airplane.
On the other hand, it's a very sophisticated aircraft, isn't it?
It is. It's one of the things that you realize when you go through your initial training on it is it was a clean sheet design. The Swiss at Pilatus built it in the 1990s. And so whereas a King Air, if you're used to, a competitive airplane might be a King Air 200, which is a great airplane. But the King Air is based on a 1950s design. It was a Queen Air with piston engines and kind of grew up into the King Air and the 90 and the 200. And while it's a great airplane, it's an older design, and you can see it in the systems and the switches and the checklists. PC-12 was brand new in the mid-1990s, and so it's built like a Swiss watch. It's very thoughtfully designed. My favorite example of this is the fuel. The fuel in the Pilatus is on and off, and that's it. there's sure you can diagram it, and there's motive flow, and there's pumps, and high pressure pumps and low pressure pumps, but in normal operation, you never touch the fuel. The fuel is on, and that's it. There's an auto balancer between tanks. There's automatic pumps. The starting mechanism is really a lot like a jet, whereas my first turboprop was a Piper Cheyenne 2XL, not an airplane many people have flown. But the joke on that was you didn't need to lock it, because if you could get it started, you could have the airplane. It was like a 27-step startup sequence of flip this, turn this, wait a second, don't be too fast. Well, the Pilatus, you basically turn the battery master on and hit start. It's almost like a jet. So there's just lots of things like that the Swiss really thought hard about and did a clean sheet design so that it was made from the start to be a single pilot airplane and really reduce a lot of the workload. So it's a great machine in that sense.
If I remember correctly, originally Pilatus developed this aircraft for the Royal something. It was like a medevac service that they had in Australia, so that's why the aircraft had that big back door to open, and it's so rugged because it was intended to land at like unpaved fields.
That's right. It's actually the original use it was meant to be an airliner. It was meant to be a small airliner for the European market, where I think the original concept is you'd put 9 seats in it. And these were not luxurious business jet seats. These were like airline seats. You'd have 9 seats in the back, and they would fly it during the day as a passenger airline. And then at night, they'd rip the seats out and they'd fly cargo. And so this was the model. That's why I had that flat floor, which is kind of unique for a turboprop of its size. And the airline thing never quite happened. EASA didn't really love the idea of single engine IFR at the time, lots of other things. So they quickly pivoted. And one of their very first customers was the Royal Flying Doctor Service, RFDS, in Australia. And they are one of the biggest users of Pilatus aircraft. And they fly, it's Australia, it's very remote parts, especially in Western Australia. And they'll fly long distances. It can be 1,000 miles to get somebody to a hospital for major surgery. And so they'll often land on roads or just out in the bush. And it can do that, and it can land off field, and then it has the big back door, so it's easy to load a stretcher or other gear. And then they can take off and fly 1,000 miles to Perth or somewhere like that for the medical care. So it ended up being the perfect use. I don't know that they built it specifically with that in mind, but very quickly the RFDS said, you built the airplane for us, and we want a lot of them. And so they've been really one of the longtime users and have tested a lot of the airplane over the years. It's also used a lot in northern Canada. They fly in very remote strips in northern Canada up on the tundra. So pretty much what I do with it in the U.S. flying around is pretty basic compared to what the airplane does in some parts of the world.
John, you mentioned that the EASA is not very happy with single engine commercial flights, right? Well, we are now moving towards the discussion into either single pilot or no pilot at all, right? Inside the airplanes, and actually Airbus is doing a lot of noise about it.
Pushing, right?
Yeah, they are pushing, and they're doing a big noise about it. The single pilot stuff, they are testing a lot of stuff. And I would like to connect this conversation and your approach to the amazing Pilatus to an article that you wrote, which is called "What Pilots Can Teach the World About AI." And this is a hot topic, and this is a topic that I love it as well. And let's start talking about these, because I think this is a good moment for us to step into these waters, because you just mentioned you're just talking about a very sophisticated aircraft, which is single pilot, which does basically everything automatic, like you said, right? And we are moving towards the same concept to bigger airplanes and to commercial airplanes, right? So I'd like you to, to hear from you your thoughts and your incredible article. I was reading. I was impressive because it connects so much with what I think about this topic, and I'd like to hear from you your thoughts about AI and our profession.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic, but I think my point in writing that article was a lot of the conversation around AI has been presented in a way as if nobody had ever thought of these questions before, when in fact in aviation for probably 20 years now, we've been having this debate, whether it's GPS or autopilots and automation, auto throttle, we keep going. Even in GA now, we have things like Garmin's auto land system. We've been having a conversation about computers and humans in the flow, in the loop for many, many years. And some of those principles, I think, apply very well. So, is a single pilot airliner technically possible? Sure. I mean, absolutely. You guys could tell me more than I could. But technically possible doesn't answer the question. There's a whole conversation around reliability and backup. There's a whole conversation around social acceptance and the passengers on board. It's just, I think sometimes these conversations get simplified into, well, couldn't we technically fly an airplane with one pilot or even no pilots? Sure, and we do, and the military does it every day. But that doesn't mean that's necessarily the right answer. And one of the things that I think is really underappreciated by most people around the world is just how incredibly safe airline flying is. It's absolutely one of the miracles of the modern world that you essentially have a 0% chance of dying on a major commercial airline. Every year there are a handful of crashes, but a handful out of hundreds of millions, billions of passenger flights taken every year. It's just incredibly safe. And I think we take that for granted a lot. And so what that means is the burden on a fully automated system is quite high. It's not good enough to say, well, it's 98% good, and that would work. Well, we don't run on 98% in aviation. We run on 99.99999% good. And I think that's where a lot of the conversation is going to have to come in. I play with ChatGPT. It's great. It's exciting. If it gets the facts wrong about an article I'm researching, I'll go double check it. If it creates an image for me that has a person with 6 fingers, I'll notice that. We're not there in aviation. We have a higher standard. So I am all in favor of technology. I love technology. I think some of the things we have in the modern cockpit are truly important safety innovations, but we just have to keep in mind the standard, and the standard we deal with in aviation is quite different.
Yeah, and just to add on this point, like by the time this episode go live, go to the air, it will be almost 1 month since I did my last ICAO English test in order to be able to fly internationally. And one of the questions was exactly this topic. Like, do you think that a first officer will be replaced by AI in the future? And my answer went on the same lines. And just recently, we had a conversation in our group here at the podcast about GPS jamming and GPS spoof. So how would AI react to that? We don't know, because it's overly relying on those external signals to know their position. And that's something that humans know better than a computer. For example, nowadays we have the EGWPS system to warn us about terrain. And if you have a GPS spoof signal, the aircraft will think that it's pretty close to terrain, when a human eye can look outside and see, no, I'm here at 35,000 feet. There's nothing near me. And that's one of the things that I don't think that the technology is mature enough to replace one human. Also, there is the point that, let's say that one of the pilots gets incapacitated for whatever reason, doesn't matter why, but it gets incapacitated. It's not able to fly. Are you going to rely solely on the computer to take the actions? And even with the Garmin AutoLens system, right now, as far as I know, it's only certified to work in the United States, where there is a completely different infrastructure compared to the rest of the world. Like, it's a league of its own, the United States. So that's why the AutoLens from Garmin can work over there. And it's really limited right now.
Go on, John, sorry.
There's a continuum of safety. That's the phrase that the FAA uses. They're really big on this, and I actually think they're right. There's this concept of a continuum of safety. And at one end might be a single engine experimental home-built aircraft. And you have more flexibility there, and also less of a guarantee of safety. It's more your own personal risk. And as we move up that continuum of safety to general aviation, to business jets, when we get all the way to the other end of airline, what they've basically said is we're not going to tolerate any extra risk. And so I think that's what we're talking about here is, Is it possible that a small cargo airline flying smaller airplanes would go one pilot? Well, yeah, they already do. Might one of those test no pilot? Possibly. But I think when you get to the passenger airline realm, you're all the way at the edge of that safety continuum. And we talk a lot about single points of failure, right? I mean, we know that the modern jet engine very likely is not going to fail. Modern jet engines are incredibly reliable, but we still have two of them on a 787 or a 777 or a 737 or an A320. And a huge part of the reason for that is redundancy. So I think it's the same thing. Pilots are all about backup, and you have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. And so I just think that's the culture that has worked, and we need to keep in mind when we talk about these innovations.
Yeah, it's interesting we brought that subject because I think it's we can take that to many other conversations about pilot shortage. For example, how much pilot shortage is like feedbacking the conversation on single pilot operations. I have my own ideas too. Like, for example, when we talk about the military doing this every day, in the military, the idea is to not expose the human to the risk. And
right.
When we take it to the civilian world, it's the opposite. We are exposing more people to the risk if we use automation. And I don't think we are ready to go one pilot until we are ready to go no pilot. Because if you have one, it's like we have none, right? Like if you lose that one, then who's going to take over? Anyway, I don't think this is a big threat to airlines right now, but I think there's something nobody's talking about that could become a threat potentially in the next 10 or 15 years to the whole way the industry is built on for the last 60 or 70 years, maybe, if you just consider the jet age. Starship. What do you think about it? If it works, that they take 400 people in an hour and a half to Japan and they start escalating that, how do you think that would work? Or is there any other thing that we haven't talked here that you have thought of?
I think it's interesting that all of the innovation for the last 25, 30, maybe even longer years in aviation has been around safety or cost. The time to get from, Paris to New York is the same it was in 1985. In fact, in some cases, slower. The 747 is faster than a lot of modern airliners because, again, we've optimized for efficiency or for cost or for safety instead of raw performance. And I think it'll be interesting to see if that really lasts forever. As you alluded to, at some point, we're going to have to break that barrier on performance and allow radically shorter trips, especially as the world gets ever more connected. I look forward to that. I feel like we're overdue for that. And obviously there are technical challenges there around, a supersonic flight. There are legal challenges around that. It's not a simple problem. It's not because there aren't smart people working on it. But I do think we may be coming to the end, and maybe, I don't want to open up the whole 737 MAX debate, but that may be kind of the end of the how far can we push the efficiency gains in aviation. We maybe need to start thinking about another leap in terms of performance, whether that's really radically new engines and propulsion, or that's radically new, wing designs, construction. It feels like we're due for that. I hope my grandchildren can get to Tokyo faster than I can today, but hasn't been the path we're on the last 2 or 3 decades.
Well, yeah, I think ultimately we will all be flying PC-12s together, and that's it. Me and Anderson and everybody else in the airline industry.
General aviation is going to become like sailboats are today, right? Before they were the only way of moving, and now they just for leisure.
Here's one thing I know, regardless of what we're flying, whether it's a 787 or a PC-12, or whether there's one pilot or 3, the key role for the pilot is that situational awareness. And somebody mentioned this. That is the one thing that AI cannot replace, at least not right now, and I don't see in the short term. The key point of the human there is that big picture situational awareness. Where are we? Where are we going? When that box says that, there's a terrain alert, you have the big picture knowledge to know I'm at 35,000 feet. There's not a terrain alert. That's the key role that I just don't see short term is going to get coded out of anything. And so I just think that's a great mindset no matter what you're flying. It's true in a Cessna 172, it's true in a Boeing. that maintaining situational awareness, really having a mastery of where you are, where you want to be going, is such a critical skill that if you don't feel like you've heard that from your flight instructor in training, start asking questions about that, because that's such a key piece to learn.
It's the aviation, right? To start with.
Exactly, but we're talking about risk assessment, right? The situation one is that you mentioned is about risk assessment that we do 24/7, right? So we're there to predict risks and create mitigations to don't get into a trap and then don't create unsafe conditions. And well, I also wrote an article about these. That's why I really love this topic. And it's well based on one fantastic neuroscientist, which is Brazilian, by the way, Dr. Miguel Nicolelis. And he says one thing that is very interesting. He says that AI is neither artificial and neither intelligent, right? And this is the root base of this discussion, because it's not artificial because it has to be loaded with database, right? So there is someone loading, right? Its database, and it only works with database, nothing else, right? You can load with billions and billions and billions of database, but there is never a possibility of predicting something that was never happened before, like with Sully, right? So Sully is a very good example with that. And it's also neither intelligent, because intelligence is something from the nature of the human beings, right? And intelligence is supposed to act your senses. So, for example, a pilot would smell something burning, right, before a sensor would catch, right, the smoke or the fire or the temperature, right? So you smell something burning, and then you decide, okay, let me divert, because it doesn't sound well, it doesn't smell well, and then let me anticipate the threat, and then you alarm.
And the computer doesn't feel it.
Doesn't feel it. It doesn't, right? It happened to me. So it's not intelligent because it doesn't use the senses, and we use our senses for the good and for the bad as well, of course. But we need to train humans better, right? And as you said that you are into training, I would like to navigate into this direction now. We have a new generation of pilots, right? Which is very different from our generation. I guess we both kind of a same age, I believe. I don't know, this generation is facing something unique, right? From one side, we have so much information. Everything is there. Everything is there for you. You can fly a 380 or 747 basically online, right? And you get to know 70% of everything, right? From a flight simulator, from Sporty's online stuff and everything. But this new generation, they also lack some experience, of course, some life experience that we came across when we were young, right? And when they step in the aircraft or in the flight deck, they will have to deal with that, right? They will have to deal with this. Okay, I know a lot, but I don't have this self-experience, or I didn't develop myself as a human being yet, right? So I think that's something that's very interesting into the new generation. And what are your thoughts about this generation that, you're very close to them, right? Because you develop a lot of stuff with these new guys. So how do you see this new generation of pilots coming on?
Yeah, it's a real change, I think, in terms of that, what I'd call the middle experience. The basic flight training, I think, is relatively the same. Sure, there's different technologies, but you still got to learn how to do stalls and steep turns and crosswind landings. And so that primary training, the basics are the basics. You got to learn that. It's like the joke about music. What do great musicians do? They practice scales. What do great pilots do? You practice landings and slow flight. But there's that middle range between basic training and then really what I'd call on-the-job training. In the U.S., at least, 20, 25 years ago, you would have spent some time flying maybe for a small charter airline. You would have flown cargo at night. You would have built up a lot of experience in a variety of roles. Not all of them looked very much like flying, in the left seat of a Boeing. But what you're doing, remember on the AI topic, a lot of the way that AI training works is modeled on how humans work. You know, if you're a pilot in the airplane and you encounter a situation, what you're doing, whether you know it or not, you are comparing the current situation against your rough mental history. You're saying, does this fit any pattern I've seen before? Oh, this happened once before. I had that light go on and that temperature go up, and that meant this. And so what you're really doing when you gain experience in training, you're building your own personal law, your own self. And so I think that's the part that's really hard to replace. And when you're an airline pilot and in the US, you go right into an airline job at 1,500 hours instead of maybe previously 3,000 or 4,000 hours, that's the gap. So that's what I think new pilots have to be really aggressive about seeking out, is find that diversity of experience wherever you can. Maybe it's not even a paid flying job. Maybe you're riding right seat with somebody else, but you want to try to expose yourself to as many of those situations as you can, because yeah, you can have the debate about, do pilots these days not have as good as stick and rudder skills because of the autopilots? Maybe, but that's solvable. You know, good training can address that. Good training, and here at Sporty's, we start very basic. We start with looking outside the windows. Don't look at the panel. You're not going to touch the autopilot, and then we build from there. But I worry sometimes it's those more middle experiences that are really hard to recreate. And so a lot of that is going to be dependent on the on-the-job training and hopefully being paired with, if you're at an airline, being paired with some good captains that really can provide you some great real-world training, because there's just no substitute for experience when you're dealing with things like emergencies or weather or different airports. You just kind of have to experience some of that. So I would just urge new pilots to seek out that experience wherever you can. You never know when it's going to come in handy.
Yeah, coming on this topic, that becoming staying with training a bit more here. You're talking about the here in the US. Of course, we have this whole conversation about shortage, which is something that doesn't really happen worldwide. Honestly, I think the way it's going here is much more aggressive. And to just last this weekend, Nick Fialpas, who has another important podcast, he came with a post about how was the NGPA, and he felt it was kind of different. It was more competitive than the years before. They had more pilots there for a less amount of job, let's say. So some people understood his post like, okay, so that moment that we had after COVID, and everybody who was deeply involved with it, we knew that thing wouldn't last that much. So just as we thought in 2022 was already a big hiring, in 2023 also. I have my own ideas. I don't want to bias anyone by them. So I want to hear from you before I say anything. How long do you think this trend is going to go?
Yeah, great question. This is a question we talk about at Sporty's a lot, obviously. I think there's two parts to that answer. I think, number one, at least in the US, this trend has a ways to go, but it's going to be a different pace. So I think there were really two stories that came together at the same time. There was the acute crisis of COVID, which led to a lot of early retirements and furloughs and pilots that didn't come back. And so that was a very acute, in the span of 3 months, a lot of airlines lost a lot of pilots that just didn't come back. But then laid on top of that was a longer run, more demographic shift, which was, the baby boom generation retiring, the military's not putting out as many pilots as they once did. And that's more of a long term. And so I think where we are now is the acute phase, COVID-induced phase, all the early retirement, that has worked its way through the system pretty well. And so I think that's what we're starting to see is that has passed. What we still have is that longer term story of generational turnover. And so I think that's going to keep pilot hiring pretty strong for at least another 5 years here, if not 10. But it's not going to be at the frenzied pace of 2021, 2022, where there's really the kind of jet fuel poured on top of that of the COVID stuff. So I don't think it's binary. I don't think it's all good, all bad. I think we've transitioned to a new phase in hiring, and I'm still pretty high on it. I think it's a great time still to get in the industry, but it may not be quite the automatic, in the US, 1,500 hours, get hired, 1 year, upgrade to captain, just zoom to the top of the seniority list. I think those days are over, but that doesn't mean it's not a great time to get in the industry.
Now, what would you say to someone who is a teenager and wants to become a pilot?
I think it's still a great career. I think, a lot of the scary stories about AI and pilotless airplanes, some of that will happen. Military, as I said, you're seeing that happen. Cargo, I could see some of it, but I just don't see in the foreseeable future where airlines are pilotless or even one pilot. So I still think it's a great industry. And as I mentioned, aviation is such a broad industry. It's not just airline flying. And so I think there's a lot of other jobs that are exciting and rewarding and well paid that will be around for a long time. So if you're into aviation and you love it, I still think it's a great time to get into it. Do your homework, make sure you know what you're signing up for. Seek out good training, make yourself a great candidate, obviously. Don't just do the bare minimum. Maybe the really easy days are over, but I think it's absolutely still a great industry and a great career to get into. And I still think there's lots of growth around the around the world. I'm sorry. The U.S. may mature before the rest of the world does, but some of the growth in South America and Asia is still. I think there's a lot of growth to be had there, and the airline business is a global business. So I think that bodes well for people getting into the industry.
Hora do cafezinho do Farol de Pouso, um oferecimento. Nex Atlas, o aplicativo definitivo de planejamento de voo e navegação aérea do piloto brasileiro. FCT, Human Development. Cursos de CRM e gerenciamento de equipes de alta performance. Porque desenvolvimento humano faz toda a diferença, e disso nós entendemos. FCT, Because Human Performance Matters. E Trem de Pouso, a primeira escola online especializada na formação de pilotos. Ajude o Farol de Pouso a continuar produzindo conteúdo aeronáutico de qualidade através do nosso Apoia-se. É só acessar apoia.se/Farol de Pouso e escolher com quanto quer contribuir. É fácil e sem complicação. Acesse também Linktree/Farol de Pouso e confira todos os conteúdos EAD já produzidos pela nossa equipe. Você ajuda a gente e ainda alavanca sua carreira. Procurando melhorar seu inglês, se preparar para sua primeira seleção de companhia aérea, buscando sua elevação para comando ou pensando em expatriar? Então conte com a FP Aviation. Acesse FP Aviation no Instagram ou no LinkedIn e fique pronto para o mercado de trabalho. Agora de volta ao nosso episódio.
There is another article of yours that I was reading, and I thought it very interesting. I think it fits well this time here that we're talking about training, about new pilots, and how can we. It doesn't matter if we are experienced pilots or new pilots. We're always learning, right? So, and there is an article of yours very interesting that says that pilots need to be generalists, not specialists. Right. I'd like to hear your thoughts, because this is brilliant. I really love what you wrote. So can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, this is a hot button topic for me. This is a soapbox for me. But I see there's a lot of interest around attracting a new generation to aviation, which is great. But it often gets pigeonholed into this idea of STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, as if it's just I could be computer science or an airline pilot. And I just think that's incredibly unfair and simplistic when describing the job of a pilot. To me, the whole appeal of being a pilot is that it's not just an engineering job. It's so much more. You have to be, think as an airline pilot, you could be dealing with an issue in the cabin where you've got to be a people person. You've got to be a crisis manager. You're dealing with, you're being a manager. If you're a captain on an airline, you're a manager of people. You're managing, your first officer, your cabin crew, the gate crew. Sure, there's the flying part, there's the weather part, there's the mechanical part. I just think flying is about much more than a simple specialize in one thing and be, an engineer. I think that sells it short, and I think that also doesn't create great pilots. As I wrote in the article, the best pilots I know really thrive on all of the diversity of topics. They love talking about weather, and they love geeking out about engines, and they love working with people, and they love thinking creatively. I mean, sometimes people roll their eyes when I say this, but there is a creative way to fly a flight, even if you're flying an IFR flight plan on an RNAV arrival. Well, I'm looking at the weather up there, and I think we're going to get beat up between 20,000 and 15,000. So what can we do to minimize our time there? And there's an element of creative thinking there. And so the best pilots to me are generalists. They know a lot about a lot of topics. They're not just narrow. And if you wanted to make me complain about the new generation of pilots, which I won't, because I love them, and I think most of them are great. But the one trap I do see people fall into, and some of this is on the flight school side, is this very specialist. We're going to train you to be a first officer on a 737, and we're going to make you a specialist for that exact role. And I just think that's unfair, because I think A, that's less fun, and B, you're not as good of a pilot if you don't embrace all the parts of the job.
Yeah, it's good that you brought. Sorry, go, Conrado.
No, go on, Anderson.
No, it's good that you brought this perspective on what we're talking before, and as one of your favorite subjects, I know it's weather, and you talked about weather before, and one of my favorite, and probably also Conrado's favorites parts in Airfax Journal is the no-go decision scenarios. So I was curious about how do you come with those scenarios? How real are them? Not realistic, because they are all realistic, but how real are them?
Yeah, sometimes they're real. Sometimes they're actual flights I'm thinking about. A lot of times what I'm trying to get at there is obviously make it a difficult decision. If there's a line of severe thunderstorms, it's an easy no-go. And if it's calm winds and unlimited visibility, it's an easy go. I like to find those kind of in-between situations where you could make an argument to go, or you can make an argument to not go. And a lot of it depends on the individual pilot and your experience and your risk profile and all kinds of other things, because that's the point. The point is not whether you go or not. The point is for you to evaluate your decision-making process and think about, how do I make safe decisions? And if I had to say there's a secondary goal, I think some pilots, especially general aviation pilots that I run across, they're afraid to go sometimes. And I respect that. You want to be safe. And we all read the stories that are scary. And so it's a very nuanced subject. I'm not saying blast off in terrible weather and do something stupid. But I think it's easy to go too far that way sometimes. And because you could find a reason to cancel every flight. I mean, I've seen this. We have some students in our flight school. They think they're being safe, but they're actually being overly conservative. You could find a reason to cancel every flight. And I really don't think you grow as a pilot unless you occasionally stretch yourself. Now, make it smart. Maybe take another pilot along. Maybe stretch yourself on the destination weather, but know that you have an en route alternate that is great weather, or whatever it might be. There are ways to mitigate that risk, but I think it's too easy. If I had a dollar for every time somebody said it's better to be on the ground wishing you're in the air than vice versa, I'd be rich. But there's more to it than that. I mean, we're pilots because we want to fly. So I like to approach a lot of these things as if I had to go, how would I do it? And sometimes the answer is you can't. You can't safely do it. But I think that's a good thought experiment sometimes. And certainly, I'm not an airline pilot, but flying the Pilatus sometimes, I mean, our assumption is we're going. If the weather is anything better than horrible tomorrow, we're going to go to bed assuming that we're going to wake up and go tomorrow, and we'll find a way. And it may not be direct. We may have to go 200 miles out of the way. We may have to go at a different altitude. We may have to go at a different time. But a lot of times, I'd say most of the time, there's a way to do it if you want to. And so I just think thinking through that process is a really good educational experience to make you think about how you make weather decisions.
Yeah. Bottom line, when it's in the black or when it's in the white, that's a no-brainer. You don't need to take discussions on that. But the problem is the gray area. The gray area is where you need to think. And one thing that I miss here in Brazil, it's that our authority, we don't have the same type of materials like the FAA gives for free for everyone, like the FAC, for example. We don't have that here. And the first chapter of the FAC is ADM, it's aeronautical decision making. It's a like a quick glance, a basic topic, just for you to know, like you are going to make decisions throughout your career, because the FAA sees the private pilot certificate a little bit different from what Brazil says here. Like we can do almost anything with our private pilot license. We can just fly visually on single engine, most of that, but we cannot like share the expense with our friends like you guys can do over there. So it's more limited than what you can do in the United States. And Anderson, were you going to say something?
No, it's nice that you brought that. I mean, many people, it remembers me of another thing that was not here on my list, but I'll bring it anyway because I think it's a interesting topic. Here in the US, we hear a lot of people complaining about FAA regulations and the way the FAA takes care of everything. And I had the privilege of having to deal with the Brazilian aviation, the Middle East as well. And the authorities there are so different in the approach. Like Henrique was saying, they're much more restricted. They're much more even short-sighted in some stuff, more bureaucratic. And how do you think? How much do you think of the way the opinion comes here toward the authority here in the U.S.? How do you think that is limited because people didn't have the opportunity to experience something else and see that actually it's not that bad? Are you? I see you're very goal-minded, which is great. But even honestly, when I see some regulations that we have here in the U.S., they are very goal-minded. That clever but not legal but not clever thing. Some things that are legal, they're not even clever to do. So how do you see that approach from most pilots of complaining all the time about the authority?
Oh, well, Americans, we have a rich tradition of being spoiled and not knowing it. So, we always think we've got it worse. And then an American goes outside the country and realizes, well, maybe it's not so bad. I think the FAA is a great example. I mean, sure, I've got lots of stories about the FAA I could tell you that are frustrating, and they move slowly, and there's all kinds of things that they could do better. So if you wanted my list of 10 ways the FAA can improve, I have them for sure. But having said that, what is the FAA's ultimate goal? And if their ultimate goal is a safe air transportation system, which I think it is, you have to say they've won. They've been incredibly successful because there hasn't been a major U.S. airline crash in 12 years, 13 years, something like that. So by that measure, you'd have to say the FAA has been maybe the most successful federal regulator in the history of our country. And so anytime you criticize the FAA, and I've done it, but you have to start from there, that they're not that far off because they've achieved their goal. Now, maybe I would say they need more balance, that yes, that safety is great and very important, but we could get the same level of safety with some more, lower costs or lower regulation or more flexibility. And that would be my argument, is you can maintain that standard of safety with making some changes. But at a basic level, they've done their job. Their job is to promote safe air transportation in the U.S., and they did it. And honestly, as general aviation pilots, as much as we like to complain in the U.S., we have lots of flexibility. I can go take off from our airport here at Sporty's. I can go take off in our company's Cessna 182, and I can go fly 500 miles and not file a flight plan and not talk to any air traffic controller and not have to file any paperwork and not have to pay any fees to anybody. So yeah, maybe it was better in 1950, but it's not bad now. It's pretty hard to find that level of freedom anywhere else in the U.S. So we probably all ought to be a little more thankful in the U.S. about what we can do.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm a big fan of general aviation in the U.S. and we know that for fact that it's the greatest general aviation in the world, and this is of course a reflex of the way that FAA deals with it.
Yeah, I always felt interesting that there are that many differences between FAA and ANAC here in Brazil. You said that you can fly 500 miles without filing a flight plan. For us, that's unfeasible. So we pretty much need to file a flight plan whenever we need to talk to ATC or be under air traffic services, or whenever we are going 27 nautical miles or more from our departure airport. So it's a completely different set of regulations. And I always felt interesting that you can also take off from your little Piper Cub and land in gravel bars and do stuff that brings general aviation towards like an outdoor activity. So it's a different approach for this, you know. And the training structure is different. We do usually here in Brazil the IFR together with the commercial training, and you guys do the other way around. You get your private pilot license, and then you get your IFR, and then you go explore the system and file flight plans and fly IFR and explore it before you get your commercial. So it's a completely different mindset. And I think it's amazing. It's different, but it's amazing.
No, but also, if you take a look here on the way that flight instructors are trained in certified here in Brazil, it's completely different as well. For example, in the United States, you have the CFI, which is the equivalent of our instructors, our normal instructors rating here. It's the first level, just for visual flights. Then you have a specific one for instrument instruction, then one specific for multi-engine instruction, which I think it's more fair. Here in Brazil, it's based on your experience. But in order to instruct for instruments here in Brazil, you need to have real 50 hours from under instrument flight rules. But, okay, how does it qualify you to teach someone how to fly instruments? The same thing with the multi-engine rating. Like, you need to have 15 hours flown on the type of aircraft that you are going to give instruction. But okay, how does it make me a good instructor in that sense? I think it would be more fair if we had here like those dedicated sets of ratings that you need to add on your roster to give instruction.
One of the things that is not really written in the regulations in the U.S., but is starting to happen with the pilot hiring boom, is there is kind of a divergence between general aviation flying and airline flying. So say a customer who comes into our flight school at Sporty's and they say, I want to learn to fly. Well, they're going to have to start with first solo and a private pilot certificate. But very quickly, it's going to depend. Are you looking for a career? Are you going to an airline job? Or do you want to fly, buy a, Bonanza and fly general aviation? Because I do think that's a different skill set. And certainly there's lots of airline pilots who are good GA pilots and vice versa. But it is a different skill set. And so that's not really reflected in our regulations. But I know that we'll make some subtle changes to training. If you say, I'm really going straight airline, I want to get there as fast as I can. Going to be a slightly different training experience than I want to be a single pilot IFR owner operator. I think we don't talk about that enough in the US, that is a different skill set. And for me, flying single engine IFR, single pilot in GA airplanes is the most fun I do. I just love it. It's so rewarding, but it's hard. And it's a different environment than, a two pilot airplane, airline style, SOPs, turbine engine. They're both great. They can both be safe, but I do think it takes different training and experience if you want to be good at one versus the other.
Yeah, just to finish with this last topic here that we're talking, there's a lot of people that see aviation as like a romantic stuff, like a sunset with music and you're flying, and we're dealing with something which is actually like it's very dangerous, actually. It's not dangerous. Dangerous is not the word, but it's very unforgiving, right? That's the right word for it. So do you think that many people that you came across along the years, they don't have really this sense of danger that they should have, or they, like you said, some people, they are over conservative in the other hand, right? But do you think that we are still looking at it, especially for whoever is starting now, and they're just taking their first discovery flight or whatever, and they go there for discovery flight and they get like scared of what happened and say, you know what, I don't want to see this anymore. We know that the cut is very big, like something 80% or so of the people who start aviation training, they never finish. Do you think that is still a thing, or people are getting more realistic about
I think this is one area where new pilots these days are maybe a little different. And the phrase is risk management, which is a phrase that has been used and abused and stretched to mean all kinds of different things. So I kind of hate to use that phrase, but at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. Aviation is neither safe nor unsafe. Aviation has risk. And so what we do as pilots is we manage risk. We evaluate the risk and we manage it. And that's not some superpower of pilots. That's what we all do as human beings. You get in a car to drive somewhere, you're taking on some risk and you've decided that the risk is worth it because of whatever you're going to do. You take a certain job. Life is all about risk. If you got out of bed in the morning, you accepted some risk in your life. And so what you're doing all day, every day, whether you know it or not, is making a bunch of risk management decisions. And aviation just sort of amplifies that because the stakes are so high. If you make the wrong risk management decision, it can kill you or kill your passengers. And so that's the mentality I really wish we taught, is more of that constant risk management, not in a very formulaic, let's run the numbers on, your risk score is 26 and that's a red light. I don't like that because that simplifies it again to that sort of specialist idea, but more just a way of thinking of we're going to manage the risk. And sometimes the risk is too much and we can't mitigate it. Sometimes it's manageable. But I think that's the thing that I sometimes see new pilots struggle with, because so many parts of life now are so safe. So many things, even 30, 40 years ago, that might have, created safety problems or could have killed you are better. Just life is safer these days. And so as a result of that, I think some people are not equipped to think about these risk management decisions. They're just not used to thinking in those terms of, hey, what I'm doing can be incredibly safe, but also if I mess up, it's a problem. And I really think as an industry, we need to have a more real conversation about how we teach risk management. Again, not to scare them and not to make them think it's just another formula that they have to calculate, but as a way of approaching life every day, and in particular flying. So that would be my hope for pilots and flight instructors at all levels, including up to the airlines, is that's really your job, is evaluating and managing risk.
Yeah, Richard Collins wrote about this in a very interesting way, actually. He said that some people, they like aviation because they like the risk. And so there must be we can just make it safe to a certain level, because below that, it's going to be always people who are going to be willing to risk more than they should, right?
And the one piece I always tell new pilots, the major difference is in aviation, you control how safe you are to a very large extent. If I'm driving down the street in my car, that other car can swerve over and hit me and kill me due to no fault of my own, That's much less likely in the air. In the air, it's really on me, that I control whether I go today, what time I go, what altitude I go. It's very much on the pilot. And some people love that. Like you said, Anderson, some people, that's great. I'm in control and I can make flying as safe as I want to make it. Some people, it kind of scares them, like, wow, so it's all on me. And I think that may be the piece that you get out of which type of person are you. You either find that liberating and exciting, that it can be really safe and it's on me. I'm not depending on other people I haven't met driving their car safely. Either that appeals to you or it feels kind of scary.
Cool. And since we mentioned Richard Collins here, by the way, as Henrique said, the podcast is going to be published before the end of the period where you can apply actually for Richard Collins Writing Prize for young pilots, right? We're gonna have a lot of people in the audience that could maybe try to take a chance on the prize. Could you talk to us about the prize, please?
Yeah, great point. So we've been doing the Richard Collins Writing Prize for young pilots for I think 6 years now. And so every year we hand out a first prize, $5,000, second prize, $2,500. So it's real money. And it's for the best article by a pilot who is 24 or younger. And we've had some great winners over the years, write some really great stories. We try to really encourage both young pilots and young writers. And so if you want to find out more about it, you can go to airfaxjournal.com and you'll find it on there. It's a great opportunity. Like I said, it's one of my favorite things. I get to be one of the judges. So every year I get to read 100 entries of young pilots sharing their story. There's a particular topic every year we pick, and it's just a lot of fun. But that's what makes me not be very down about the next generation. You know, some people love to complain about, oh, kids these days and everything. Boy, I read these articles by 17, 18-year-old pilots, and I think we're going to be okay. We're going to be just fine.
And because we have this great shift, like you mentioned, with the baby boomers, we're going to have a generational shift. Like the average airline pilot of the 2030s and 2040s will have very little to do with what we had in the last 40 years, right? And we are getting close to our end here. So I have to ask, I'm kind of ready to copy stuff. If you're ready for it. All right.
I'm ready.
So the most relevant article Airfax ever published.
Oh boy, that's like picking your favorite kid. I mean, my personal favorite, you got to go read some of the old Richard Collins articles. You know this, Anderson, some of his classics about just what we're talking about risk management or the role of a pilot in the modern airplane are just essential. It's not push this button, follow this procedure. It's how to think. And to me, that's what I try to do. And a lot of what I write about is being a great pilot is learning how to think. And so some of those classic Dick Collins articles about that are just, there's nobody else like them out there.
Great. One very important thing you've learned from making a podcast.
Well, I don't know if it's important, but I've learned there's so much wisdom out in the aviation community. I mean, I talk to a wide range of people, professional pilots and home builders and musicians who fly on the side, and everybody approaches aviation a little bit differently. And I just think there's something to learn from almost any pilot. So anytime you're out there talking to pilots, listen up. There's probably a lesson there if you're humble enough to accept it.
Cool. I'm going to go just one more, okay? You're a great editor. Thank you so much for editing my articles too, because I believe there was a lot of jokes that people wouldn't understand because I was trying to do like a direct translation or something. So I want to know your favorite article as an author, your favorite that you wrote, which was your best? And I love your articles, by the way.
Oh boy, that's such a hard one. It's probably just because it's top of mind here recently, but I really did that. Pilots need to be generalists, not specialists. I had been working on that article for about 5 years, and I could never quite get it in the shape to publish, but it's something that anybody who works with me hears me kind of rant on this subject about all kinds of things. And so I was really happy I kind of got that across the finish line. And I think in a lot of ways that sums up my approach to flying. So that's definitely one of my favorites.
Great. Is there any fight you think of picking on this work you do, making pilots more aware of the industry and aware of safety and all this stuff? Is there any fight that you think of picking and you say, okay, I'm not going to get into this because it might go the other way?
I don't know. We try to, you know this at Airfax, we try to sort of publish whatever. We don't intentionally pick fights, but we also don't shrink from any. So, for years, I've been kind of waging the battle on this whole, glass cockpits and autopilots are bad and real pilots fly tail draggers. And I just think that's totally wrong. And so, that's one that I put my nose in from time to time, that I just think that's a false choice. You can know your avionics, you can know how to use an autopilot, and you can be a great stick and rotor pilot. Why choose?
I have a suggestion to play as the prosecution here against the 1,500 hours.
Oh my, that's a hard fight to pick.
I'm the prosecution on that.
That's actually a great topic. I don't know if we've directly picked at that one. We've talked about it. I don't want to start a fight, but I personally think that rule is silly. And I know I have many friends in the airline world who would defend it, and I think it's silly because I think we should call it what it was. It was done at a time to try to raise pilot salaries, which we needed to do, and I'm glad that worked. But every time they try to dress up that rule as if it has to do with safety, I just sort of roll my eyes, because as you said, that's not the rule. Plenty other places in the world and their aviation system is very, very safe. So we want to do some changes to make flying safe. I'm all for that, but I don't think that was the original goal on that rule. So
yeah, I think
and for those of you who are listening and don't know what I'm talking about, go look after the Colgan crash in Buffalo, New York, and you're going to understand how this 1,500 hours rule started in the United States.
Yeah, it was maybe the wrong solution for the right problem or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, and if you could invite anyone to, if you have one last flight, all right? What are you flying and where you are going?
Oh boy, you're using my own question against me, Anderson. That's dirty trick. I would probably, so I fly a Citabria a little 2-seat tail dragger, and I would probably take the door off, open the window, and go fly with my dad. My dad's been a pilot, just GA pilot, but we've been flying together since I was, like a little kid. So we'd probably both get in that airplane and go fly somewhere low and slow, nowhere in particular.
Man, you mastered the answer. I have no questions.
John, before we put the landing gear down and come to our final landing here, tell to our audience about your podcast. So how they find you, and I'm very curious. To be honest, I haven't heard yet. I'm very curious to tune in and listen to you, because I found it very, very interesting. The way you talk and your ideas, and so how people can find you.
Yeah, it's called Pilot's Discretion by Sporties, and it's in all the apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find it on YouTube. And we do a new show every 2 weeks. And it's just me and one guest, and we like to put them on the spot, just like Anderson was doing with me. I like to put the guest on the spot and kind of make them answer a lot of questions and try to catch them off guard. But I have a lot of fun. I like to, as I mentioned, I like to really go broad and have a variety of pilots from all over, because I think that's, like I said at the very beginning, it's one of the most fun parts of aviation, the diversity of people and jobs. And so I try to highlight some of the interesting people I've met over the years in aviation that most pilots probably don't know about. So check out Pilot's Discretion. We have a lot of fun.
We'll do it. Well, thanks a lot, John, for being with us.
Just one thing before we wrap up. John, I open up here on Spotify, and looks like I already found my favorite episode with Mr. Robert Sumwalt.
He's
I really
great.
admire him. He's a really nice guy, and you guys can go back and look up for the November 7th episode on the Pilot's Discretion.
He's fantastic. The other one for airline pilots out there, go listen to the one with Steve Green from summer 2023. He's a longtime U.S. airline captain and wrote a really thought-provoking book on aviation safety. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about one pilot, two pilot, automation, glass cockpits, all that, he's a really great, thoughtful guy that, again, most people don't know about, but that's why we like having people on the show.
That's great. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks, Anderson, for bringing John with us. I hope people have enjoyed. I hope you're going to tune in on John's podcast, and I hope you stay with us for the next one. Henrique.
So for those of you who came to this end, I would like to thank very much. John, again, thank you for your time, for being with us here today. Anderson as well, for being our golden co-host here at Farol de Pouso. And I'm going to wrap this up em português e também mandar o nosso abraço, o nosso reconhecimento para os nossos patrocinadores e apoiadores aqui do canal, a Hangar 33, a Realizar, a FCT Human Development e a UFP Aviation. Muito obrigado, gente, e tchau, tchau!
Linha Column 0 Gol 5629.